What's going on, guys? The Comics Kid 2099 here. Welcome to day 110 of the 365-day graphic novel review challenge. Today, I want to talk to you about The Ring of Nibelung. This is a 4-issue miniseries from DC Comics from the early 90s by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane. It is actually an adaptation of Richard Wagner's really long epic opera, which is the story of the Volsung family, which is like 4 or 5 generations of different characters that are intersecting with Norse mythology. There's a magic ring involved, there's dragons, there's dwarves, there's all kinds of fantastical elements, and this is, as far as I know, the first graphic novel adaptation of that story. And Roy Thomas and Gil Kane are both very clearly huge fans of the source material that they are working with, and that's discussed a little bit at the beginning of this book in the foreword, and this is some really good stuff. Roy Thomas is really good at adapting that story and turning it into a comic book story, and Gil Kane is fantastic with his illustrations, and he's a guy who was active in the Silver Age in the 1960s, and I think he may have done some work on the Avengers at one point in the 70s, although don't quote me on that, but his illustrations are very good here. It's almost got this painted look to it, but it's not actually painted, but it's very good illustrations. Roy Thomas does the best that he can do doing what he's doing, and what I mean by that is that this story is so incredibly ambitious, and I don't think that this particular adaptation quite measures up to what they were trying to achieve. What I mean by that is that this is a prose version of the same story, and when you take out the glossary and the author's notes and stuff like that, this is only about 100 pages long. This is the comic book version, and it's also about 100 pages long. Now, that is a problem because this story covers about 4 or 5 generations of characters who exist in Norse mythology that were, I'm not exactly sure if they were created by Richard Wagner or if he was just taking existing characters from mythology and kind of updating them with his opera. But both of these are influenced by Richard Wagner's opera. And the problem is, when you have 4 or 5 generations of characters, you need a lot more space to cover all of that ground than just 100 pages of comics. And I don't want to get into the pros and cons of doing a story in prose and then doing a story in illustrated format. I don't want to get into all of that, but the sad fact of the matter is you can cover a lot more ground a lot quicker in a prose story in 1 page than you can in a comic book story. You can cover in 1 page of prose about the same in 1 paragraph as you could in 1 page of a comic book story. That's why I feel like this covers all the ground that you need in the same amount of time that you would actually need for a prose story. But this, it feels so incredibly rushed. It's only 100 pages and you're covering 4 or 5 different protagonists. I kind of get them all mixed up in my mind because they all have similar names like Sigly and Sigmund and Siegfried and stuff like that, so it's hard for me to keep them all separate. But this almost blows right by each of these characters. Just when you get the feeling that you're starting to get to know one of these characters, then, spoilers, they will die or something will happen to them, and then we move on to our next character in the family. I think that this story would have significantly benefited if it had just slowed down a little bit and taken a little bit more time to tell this story. Now, back in the early 1990s, I don't know if DC would have said, yeah, you can have a few hundred pages to do this epic illustration and adaptation of Wagner's Ring Saga. I don't know if they would have been okay with that. I'm actually surprised that they were okay with doing just 100 pages of adaptation, but I think that this would have been much improved if they could have just slowed down a little bit and kind of let us get to know some of these characters and let us get to know this world a little bit before moving forward with the story like it does. Like I said, I don't want to make this just be a compare and contrast between this prose story here and this comic book story here, but I really do think that when you have a 100-page prose story and a 100-page comic book story, you're going to have to lose a lot of that story to adapt it into comics. And I think that they could have benefited quite a bit if they had just not lost any of the story, if they had just made this book be a little bit longer. But like I said, I don't know if DC would have been okay with that at that time period. So that's about all that I have to say. Like I said, it's a very good story. Roy Thomas is doing a very good job adapting it in such a short amount of time, and Gil Kane is a fantastic artist. His work here is very beautiful. So if you are interested in reading this story, if you're in any way familiar with the saga of The Ring from Richard Wagner, it's had its influences on many different things in pop culture today. Tolkien was a little bit inspired by this. The Star Wars movies are pretty heavily inspired by this story. So if you're interested in this because of that, or you just want to know more about Norse mythological stories, then I would definitely recommend that you check this book out. keeping in mind that it is a very fast story, and in my opinion, it moves a little bit too fast. But that's all that I have to say about The Ring of Nibelung, this particular adaptation. I hope that you guys liked this video, and if you did, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe, and I will be back tomorrow with a different video. In the meantime, you guys have a great rest of the day. Catch you later.